How are you today? Art Jeremiah here, and I'm back with another video about building a dungeon. In today's video, we'll be building the next room in our dungeon, which is this nifty little... Let me get it up. Which is this nifty little dungeon room. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this, as well as other terrain building and crafting videos. So I've already pre-cut and measured out the rest of the dungeon, including the grid lines that I'm going to be using. And so the first thing I do is sketch out where I want this bath to be. And this is like where the ancient priests used to come to bathe or do baptisms or whatever it is ancient priests did with an old bath. But you can see it's kind of decayed away. And so what we want to do is sketch out exactly where I wanted that. I wanted it to kind of get in the way of the characters, if you know what I mean. So like that vibrant blue pool, maybe it's like full of minerals, or maybe it's full of some acidic something that's gonna hurt them. So yeah, the first thing I do is just sketch out the way I want it with my 1.4mm ballpoint pen. I'll have links to that in the description below if you're interested in using the same pen that I'm using. Just so you get the right one. They're cheap at Walmart, they're cheap at Amazon, they're cheap everywhere. Just your regular ballpoint pen. And I just sketch out like a 5 bricks in each square and do an alternating pattern like I've done with the rest of the dungeon. At least the temple part of the dungeon I've done that with. And we're going to continue that through the rest of the temple section. So we'll just fast forward through that. You've already seen, if you've been following along, you've already seen me do this. I do leave the middle part untouched because I'm going to do something different with that to make it a pool. Okay, so I pull out my Proxxon Hotwire cutter, and if you're following along, you don't have to use a Proxxon Hotwire cutter. My earlier videos is just like this cheap $20-something foam cutter, and that works just fine. Although it's not as durable and it won't last you as long, so I definitely recommend a Proxxon. So basically with the Proxxon Hotwire cutter, I'm just going to cut out where I want the water to be. And so I'm basically cutting this dungeon room into thirds to start. But we'll be gluing it all back together in a little while. This part was like a little bit complicated, but was well worth the time put in. Okay, now, I made this little, I don't know what this is called. I don't know what people call these. I know there's a name for it. I made this thing so I can put like the piece of tile on its side and I can cut straighter lines. And I've been using it and it's been working really good. It's just made out of foam and chipboard. I've glued it together and I've screwed it together. Does that make, that sounds weird. I don't know how to explain. I used like screws to hold it together tight so it doesn't fall apart and break. Anyway, I just want this little thin section of tile. And that's gonna be the tile that we use for the room. You'll see I can get nice even cuts this way. So now I cut out a little staircase that's gonna go on top in the water. It's gonna be like stairs leading into the water so the priests don't just have to like jump in, or so that the priests back in the day didn't just have to like jump in. And then I do a grid on the piece that we just cut out, just with that same ballpoint pen. I don't press too hard, otherwise it's gonna like chop all the way through the foam because it's like a really thin piece of foam. And then I use my scrap pieces to cut out wall sections that are going to be the height of the pool. And also, you may have noticed that I textured all the brickwork in the pool's bottom with a piece of asphalt. That's my go-to method for doing like a rocky texture. Sometimes I use aluminum foil, but I just feel I waste a lot of time doing the foil unless it's in like small areas or I want a smoother stone surface. And I just build up the walls in sections and hot glue them on as I go. And eventually I have the walls glued on and the floors all glued together. And this room's really coming together now. This is when it's actually starting to look like something, so that's good. It took me way longer than I thought it would take to make this part of the room. The rest goes pretty quick. I just use hot glue. You can see that I have these strips of brickwork cut out, and then I just texture those. But this is my new favorite way to do walls like this. I just cut out long strips. Well, I should say, okay. So first, I do like where each brick's gonna be. And then I cut out the strips, and then I stagger them. You can see what I'm doing right there in the video. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I just take strips, I use my blade, I go up and down, and then I flip over the 2 of the strips. That way it's staggered. Nice and quick, and looks great. And that's always what I love. I don't like wasting too much of my time building something. I get bored easy. Then I just glue them in place. Glue the walls in place. And then I got the idea that I wanted it to be easy to both take pictures of and pour in the resin a little bit easier by taking out part of the wall section. Where I didn't take it out, I actually built it just like that. All I've done is put glued parts of the toothpicks into the bottom of this wall section. Then I have holes that I put in here, and it just slides in there nice and easy. So, nice and easy. That wasn't very nice and easy because obviously I'm doing it on camera, and it's never nice and easy on camera. But you know what I mean. I kind of wanted a different look to the sand rather than just like putting little glue spots all over and then throwing sand in there. So I mixed some sand with some matte varnish. You can see me mixing it there. And it gets nice and thick. I don't know, it's good for the sand to be nice and thick like this. If you want to be able to like spread it easy, it works better than just putting it with paint. So I mixed it with this. Matte medium would be better. But matte varnish is what I had, so I used that. Almost the same thing. You can see I just paste it into the areas that I want to hide the hot glue and whatnot. Just build up some of the sections inside the pool, so it looks like it hasn't really been cleaned in a long time. Okay, and I did not remember to record when I was painting this. Anyway, so yeah, this is the tail end of me finishing up painting the room. And next, we're doing a resin pour. And I have the resin all ready to mix. This is really glossy resin. It takes a while to dry. To dry the touch, it's like 8 hours or something like that. If you're doing this, I recommend doing it like later in the day, mixing the two resins together, and then letting it sit overnight. That's the best method I can think of for this. It's not quick epoxy, but you can use quick epoxy. I don't find it works that good. I always have problems with bubbling and melting, and you can't really fix it. Okay, so I pour both part A and B in one container and slowly mix it for about, I usually do 4.5 minutes. I think the box says like 3 minutes or something like that. I mix it a little bit longer because it's slow curing resin, and I've had issues with it staying sticky before for not mixing it very much. And you don't have to mix it super fast, that's just going to give you bubbles. All you're doing is mixing it around and making sure the resin's moving, and then the molecules will bounce off each other and eventually harden. Just mix and mix and mix. Do it nice and slow. Try to mix around the outside and the bottom really good. You want the whole mixture to be mixed. This is blue ink that I'm adding. There are dyes just for resin, but some resins you can mix paint or ink in with and it won't affect the resin. Just go ahead and make sure you read the box of your directions of whatever resin you're using. And I mixed it like a nice deep sapphire blue, a little bit lighter than a sapphire actually. And I pour about half of it into the pool, making sure to pour high and with a small stream. It will help you get rid of bubbles. It's almost impossible not to have some bubbles. You're gonna get a lot of bubbles around like the rocks or like small areas like that. Sometimes it's good to take your stirrer and dip it in your resin and then go around the rocks so that you get all the air out from underneath the rocks if there's like a ledge that's going to have air under it. Do a light stream, take your time. This resin doesn't dry quick, so you can take your time on this. It's going to be the next day before the resin's dry. And then with the other half, I mix in some green, and I'm going for kind of like a blotchy look to the pool. I don't know how to explain it. You can do like swirls or anything or stuff like that. It's hard to see on camera because the colors are pretty close together. They're like the same tone and they're very transparent. I just pour it randomly throughout the pool, and I leave sections of it blue and sections of it greenish blue. And it really turns out realistic looking. It's almost like there's like some sort of algae growing in the water or something like that. That's probably the toxic algae that's going to be releasing the chemicals in the room. So you'll see bubbles starting to rise to the surface. You don't want the bubbles to stay there. It's going to make the water look all bubbly. And you might want it to stay there if it's acid or something like that. But for this, we want it like crystal clear, stagnant water. And so I take this little kitchen torch and I hurriedly go over the whole top with some heat. You don't want to do too much or it's going to like boil the foam, and then you're gonna have a mess, and then you're gonna have more bubbles. So just be quick about it. It'll pop all the bubbles on the surface. And then I usually go back another hour or so later, or half an hour to an hour or so later, and I do it again just because there'll be more bubbles that'll rise to the surface. and you should have pretty crystal clear looking water after that. As long as you followed all the directions, you should. Okay, now here's the lanterns. I was so excited to get these. August McDaniel, one of my patrons for a long time, decided he wanted to send me these lantern sconces he recently designed. And these look to be resin printed, so there's not a bunch of like striations in the lines. He wanted me to do a, what is it, unboxing. There we go. I should have. That would have been good. I forgot. I didn't read my message in time. For some reason I'm not getting my Patreon messages like I'm supposed to. But he gave me this box full of these little lanterns and some other pieces that he's designed. Don't forget to check out August's store. I'll have a link to that in my description. And yeah, so I was really excited to get these little lanterns, but I was like, man, these are gonna take forever to paint. So I used this little strainer and some black paint in my airbrush, and I painted all of them with a good coat of black paint. This is the first time I did this sort of thing. It worked out pretty good. I was thinking I was just gonna put it in a little cup and then stir it around with paint, but I do like that process, but it just takes a while for it to dry, and I know the airbrush would have dried quicker, so that way I could paint it all in one sitting. And then I used some Reaper, I can't remember what, it's some Reaper paint. I can't remember what color this is. I think it's like dark tan or something like that. And I used that to paint all the wood sections. And I'm just doing like a little bit of a zenithal highlight. Okay, now I put a little drop of oily still on my palette, and I dry brush all the lantern's metal sections with the oily still. And then I take a fine detail brush, and each of the little nails that's on the lantern sconces, I just dot with the same still. I don't want it to be too bright because I want these to be looking like worn down sconces that are on the wall. And I even had one break. I handled it too rough. I painted it anyway, and I decided to use it in the build that we're working on today. I did some touching up on all the lanterns too, because having it in the mesh kind of scratched it up a little bit. But after all that, you can see they're ready to be glued on. I just used some Elmer's white glue to glue them to the build. One thing to note, you might have just seen it. The surface of the water ended up being kind of dull. I was dumb and I added gloss coat to it. Don't do that. If you have glossy resin like this, it's going to be a lot glossier than any gloss coat that you have. I know that some popular channels do it that way. I don't know if it's because they use like the 5-minute epoxy and maybe it's not as glossy and maybe it looks better. But this is like the 10th time maybe I've tried that and it just doesn't work out. So, I mean, look how shiny that is. Anyway, I fixed it. I poured another layer of resin, just clear resin, over the top so that it's shiny again. And look at that. It's really shiny like water. So don't do that. Not a full dungeon today. Maybe next time. I'll try to do it every other time. The dungeon's almost done. We gotta finish it up. And don't worry, we're gonna have more dungeon after that. So more dungeon building. Just this dungeon's almost finished. And if you want to play with me, let me know in the description below. We'll do a playthrough of the dungeon. I'm working on something so everybody can do a playthrough of the dungeon. We'll see how that goes. I'm also hoping to do it at conventions. So let me know where you're at and what convention I should go to and have my dungeon up, whatnot. Anyway, check out my Patreon. Subscribe to the channel. Here's the Glamor Shots. If this is the first time watching my channel, go ahead and check out episode 1 of this series. That's linked on the screen right here.